series is co-sponsored by Duke Graduate Career Services. We have Annie and Trish here with us today to help set up this panel series. Today we're pleased to welcome 4 panelists, and I want to start by thanking them very much for coming to Duke today to spare their time and expertise with our postdocs and graduate students. We very much appreciate it. Jeff Havlicek is a virology scientist at Novartis. He was formerly a postdoc right here at the Duke Human Vaccine Institute and received his PhD in microbiology from Arizona State. Dana Pellis is an industrial postdoctoral fellow at GSK. She was formerly a Duke PhD student in chemistry and has been at GSK for 8 months now. Sherry Smith is the biology leader for U.S. Discovery Partnerships with Academia at GlaxoSmithKline. She was formerly a postdoc at UCLA in biophysics and got her PhD in biochemistry from Brandeis. And Liz Turbin is scientist for diagnostics and global marketing at Pfizer. She was formerly a postdoc at the Hamner Institutes for Health Sciences and received a PhD in pathology from the University of Georgia. So if you've attended these panel discussions before, you know how it works. The panelists are going to quickly introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their background, and then we'll go over questions. Many of you submitted questions in advance. There's really great questions this time, so thank you. We'll start with those, but feel free to ask questions from the audience if you want to. So, without further ado, thanks very much. Who would like to start?
Sure. I guess just a quick background on who I am and how I got to where I am. As you mentioned, I started off in graduate school at the University of Georgia. Not the most direct career path. Started off with a master's and then got a job. Was a little frustrated with the job in the USDA and then decided to go back to school and get a PhD in pathology. I moved then from Georgia to Wisconsin and did a postdoc at the medical school in Wisconsin, Madison, working on some influenza. So my background is basically virology, molecular biology, and then moved to North Carolina to the Hamner Institute. I made that move to get a little bit of industry-like experience as a postdoc, and then moved from there to Pfizer. I've been at Pfizer for about 5 years now. I started off in research and development and viral vaccines, and I'm now in global marketing department. So it's a slightly different job experience than I started with.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sherry Smith, and I am currently the biology leader for North America for Discovery Partnerships with Academia at GSK. And that role brings me into contact with a lot of academic labs as the liaison for developing academic industry collaborations. I started on my path to this career a long time ago. I did my undergraduate work at Cornell University, and to give you some perspective, while I was there, I think the first restriction enzymes were being purified and characterized. So that actually was a very motivating experience for me and kind of set me on my path, because the predictions at the time about where excitement in science was going to go was that a large commercial and biotechnology industry was going to open up and need to employ a lot of scientists. So as I was getting my undergraduate degree, I was starting already to think about the possibility that an industry-oriented career might be a great opportunity. There was a lot of energy about that as a future at the time. I did my PhD at Brandeis University. I studied ion channels with Dr. Christopher Miller, and then did a postdoc at UCLA Medical Center looking at sodium-dependent glucose transporters in epithelial cells. I went immediately after my 3-year postdoc into industry in 1991 because that was really what I wanted to do. And so that was my path. I started at Burroughs Wellcome. I've never changed companies, but companies have changed on me. So I started at BW, it became Glaxo Wellcome at some point, and then became GlaxoSmithKline. So I've worked at 3 different companies in the last 20 years, but I've never actually changed jobs. Until last year, I ran a lab. I was a principal investigator. I had my own research group in cellular and molecular biology, primarily focused on solute translocating proteins as drug targets. And then last year I transitioned into this academic industry role.
My name is Dana Pellis, and as mentioned, my career isn't as expansive as the other panelists. I graduated with my PhD in biophysical chemistry last July and started with GlaxoSmithKline as an industrial postdoc fellow. The fellowship is actually administered through the North Carolina Biotechnology Center, and my current role is with global manufacturing and supply, but it's in developing technique for global manufacturing and supply, so I have aspects of research and development as well as IP, patent law, and the global manufacturing and supply, all kind of involved in this one project.
All right. I'm Jeff Pavlicek. I'm a scientist at Novartis Vaccines and Diagnostics in Holly Springs at the flu vaccine manufacturing plant. And I got my PhD in 2007 in microbiology, and then came to Duke here at the Duke Human Vaccine Institute doing research on HIV vaccines and viral diversity. I started at Novartis Vaccines and Diagnostics last April, so I've been there for almost a year now. Currently, in my position, it's all manufacturing. There's very little research that goes on. Mainly our role in our group is to do virus strain selection and optimization for flu vaccines, and also our site is mainly here for pandemic readiness. Since we have flu cell culture, the first in the United States to have flu cell culture instead of egg-based vaccine manufacturing.
Great, thanks very much. Can you talk about what a typical day is like for you, your job responsibilities, and what you actually do all day? Do you answer emails or work in the lab?
Yes.
Or anyone, whoever would like to.
So I can answer that first. So a typical day for me would be to answer emails, write scientific justifications and risk assessments, go to quite a few meetings since our site really is functional since last year in actually making a vaccine. So we're still sort of in startup mode, so there's a lot of meeting and coordination among different groups. And so I'm in the Manufacturing Sciences and Technology group. So when I first came in to interview for this position, it's a virology position at a place that makes a flu vaccine, and so I figured there's going to be at least a few dozen virologists here. And so I came there and I figured out that there's just going to be two of us. And so everybody else are engineers and making everything work. We have a quality control organization, quality assurance organization. We have an engineering. So it's sort of quite a bit of a change from doing research into straight manufacturing. So there's a lot of different things you need to think about. There are a lot of things I learned in the last year for that.
A typical day for me, as I mentioned, I'm developing a technique to be used in manufacturing. So currently I'm in the lab establishing method validation for the particular product that we will be using this technique on. The technique will be applied to one particular drug initially, and so developing this technique for one particular drug and in the lab in RTP for the R&D side. But during the manufacturing of the drug, then I will be in Zebulon in the manufacturing side, actually employing this technique to establish equivalence to the standard technique that is currently used. In the meantime, however, I have been using GlaxoSmithKline kind of as a university in its own sense, in that I'm able to, with my manager's approval, explore other areas of R&D within GSK. So currently I'm exploring some R&D aspects in inhaled products. So in the times that I'm not in the lab establishing the method development for this technique, I'm spending my time in inhaled products, just learning basic techniques and tools in R&D aspect of industry that is purely R&D for product development instead of to be used as a technique in manufacturing. I'm mostly.
in thinking about this question, I realized that I don't have a typical day. Every day is different, but I'll kind of give you a composite typical day for me. So I work in an international group. I have members of my group are in the UK, in Singapore, and my boss, although he's located in Philadelphia, travels a great deal. So usually when I get into work in the morning and I turn on my computer, the first thing I do is respond to questions that have been generated by people who've been working anywhere between 5 and 8 hours before I got up in the morning. So that may be the first couple hours of my day. I also often do teleconferences with people early in the morning who are located in other time zones. Then I get a lull. That's usually the time when I do my thinking. So I'll be thinking about collaborations. I read the literature a lot because I work with a lot of external investigators. I'll write questions. Sometimes I'll be preparing presentations, slide packs to inform people inside GSK about the science that's going on in some of our collaborations. Then in the afternoon, I do teleconferences with the people on the West Coast that I need to speak with. Then I go home and have dinner, and then I do my teleconferences with Singapore. So I do spend a lot of time talking to people. And I think that's a very important point for you to take in, is that in industry, work is done in teams. And if you are not a natural team person, a natural communicator, a person who's comfortable with a lot of conversation and give and take of information, that is a skill that you would need to develop to have a career in industry, because it will make the difference between an okay career and a career with a lot of opportunity.
Yeah. So I'll second a lot of what I heard. Communication is key. I also work in a global role, so I have meetings starting at 6 a.m. going to midnight or 2 a.m. depending on what country we need to talk to. I do several hours of email a day. Half of my time is dedicated to overseeing the diagnostic services lab. So I help out in the lab when needed. When we have people out, like we have for the next couple of weeks, I'm in the lab 5 or 6 hours every day. I'm in 5 or 6 hours of meetings every day. Because we do have to work across the different groups. Again, as Jeff said, we have an engineering group, we have a QA group, we have legal, we have finance, we have all the different groups. And communication is key because people don't understand your value. You're not appreciated in the company, you're not kept in the company. So you have to be able to communicate well, and you have to be able to understand and take feedback well to be successful.
Great, thanks for the great answers. Would anyone like to talk about why they chose this route over the traditional academic route? Sure. One of the reasons I moved away from it is I do not enjoy teaching and did not look forward to teaching classes. I'm an introvert. I'm a lab rat. I love being that. And so I'm one of the people who really has to push myself for the communications, and that was a big learning curve for me, was how to get out and to speak out and communicate effectively. And so that's one of the reasons I moved away. Also, funding was getting really hard about the time that I stepped out, and I was just looking to do something a little different and something a little more applied. And started looking around in different areas and found this area in the research opportunities in biotech and industry, and decided to make the jump.
Thanks. So I could just ask a question about that. So you both mentioned the importance of communication skills and learning how to communicate effectively. And you're an introvert, so how did you learn? Did you just like go to cocktail parties and chat?
So I made myself go to networking events. There's a bunch in the park. There's Thirsty Thursdays or something like that, so you can actually go out, they'll give you a free beer, they'll help you talk more. Whatever it takes. I made myself take public speaking classes because I used to absolutely hate public speaking. And I did that on my own in graduate school. Give presentations at every chance you get. Talk in your departmental seminars. Just get to the point where you can get in front of a room of people and feel comfortable and be able to communicate with them.
I think I mentioned already that when I was doing my undergraduate work, the whole idea of biotechnology was first starting to emerge, and it sounded very exciting. So I think I'm probably an exception in that I never intended to go into academia. I always intended to have a industrial or biotechnology career, although I admit that I probably didn't know what that was or what it meant when I was a student. One thing I will say that I remember about that time is that I kept it a secret, because in the academic world, it seemed like that wasn't an appropriate or as honorable a career goal as being an academic and going on the tenure track. And so I didn't do as much networking and information gathering about my chosen career as I could have, during my training. So I guess what I would say is I don't think it's as much of a taboo now as it was in the 80s, but don't let that get to you. Once you get out into the real world, there's an enormous number of opportunities in science that are not in tenure track academia. So don't keep your goals and your dreams a secret. Find out a lot about what you're interested in and ask a lot of questions. Seek out people who do what you think you might want to do and talk to them. And that will help you find the right starting job. It's like networking. I was thinking about if there was any one thing I wanted to say to people coming in here today, I could just bring a big poster that said networking and put it in front of my microphone, and that would be the most important message.
I pursued a postdoc in industry to just explore industry, to get the foot in the door, see what was out there. My graduate school work was very basic research, and I wasn't familiar with industry type work or research in the applied sense or just in general. So I figured I would take this opportunity to take this postdoc and explore GSK broadly, to just explore industry. I've enjoyed my time. I decided to do this instead of the academic postdoc because I figured if I decided to go back to academia from this experience that I could seek out institutions that had ties or wanted ties with industry and then have this background and be kind of marketable towards that, but use this as an opportunity to explore industry. And so that's what I've been doing.
Yeah, so I think along with Sherry, when I first started graduate school, well, when I first got my bachelor's, I interned at a biotech company, and I really enjoyed it. And I figured I wouldn't really get very far unless I had an advanced degree. So that's when I started graduate school and got a PhD. So the reason why I didn't really, I always figured that I would get into industry and do more applied research. And so during my PhD and postdoc, it was, for the most part, it was basic research. But I wanted to be able to do science where it can actually be applied. So that's sort of why I chose to go into industry. So I think talking about being introverted and extroverted. So the group that I'm in, we're all a bunch of introverts. And so there's about 25 of us that are in the manufacturing sciences. And so when we all get together, hardly anybody talks. Okay? So no one really expresses their opinion. Well, I guess they will, but if they're maybe called upon or if they're like implored to talk. But as soon as you put us into like small groups of like 3, 4, or 5, and then everybody's just talking. And so I think that's sort of like being an introvert and extrovert. Like being in industry you don't have to be extroverted to work in industry. I think it's just you have to find a balance where it'll work for you, that you're still able to effectively communicate. So that's just a point I wanted to make.
That's a good one, thank you. So a lot of postdocs and graduate students want to know how they can get their foot in the door, how they can position themselves for this kind of career, because it seems like a big leap to make. can you talk about how you made believe in what postdocs and graduate students can do to position themselves, such as go to networking events, what kind, any certifications they could get?
So I think, yeah, I think it's mostly, it has to do with networking and being able to build a network. And so if you're doing research and you're stuck in the lab all the time, you need to, I would suggest to sort of broaden your horizons if you want to get into industry. I think going to places, there's a, I mean, in the triangle, there's some biotech type career fairs that you can go to, and then there's the North Carolina Biotechnology Association. And then secondly, this is maybe more difficult thing is the research that you do and the technical expertise that you have, is that applicable to something that a company can have? So if you study like some sort of microbe that was from outer space or something, you know, it's going to be difficult for you to get a job in industry. Maybe, okay. maybe someone's, you know, find a way to use that apply. But I would say, even if you're doing basic research, how can this be applied to something that a company is doing, or how can this be more industrious?
So my experience is a little bit different. I had very basic research that was kind of obscure for industry. So in trying to just get into industry and make that leap, I found this opportunity. It was an industrial postdoc, so it was, let me back up. I went to a panel similar to this last year, or a couple years ago, and all the panelists had just emphasized networking, but in addition to networking, just internships, or just getting your foot into the door, establishing networks, and just trying to branch out in that way. So my advisor wasn't very particularly fond of internship in industry, and my research wasn't applicable to industry. So I found this opportunity. My background didn't match the requirements for this opportunity, but I was able to squint my eyes and kind of see that I could fit in. So I applied, and I got the interview. And I think a lot of it is being able to just sell yourself as a PhD scientist who has the skills and capabilities to learn. And I think there's ways that you can apply yourself to industry in terms of different aspects of your work. So you can just show impact in different ways, such as perhaps like how long it took you to publish. So the time to publish can show that you are able to come in, learn a new technique, and return on that investment or that science. How many authors are on paper? So if there's few, then you can show that you're an independent worker. Or if there's many, then you can work in a team, or you're collaborative. There's very different ways that you can take these techniques and skills that you have, even if they're not directly applicable, and just kind of sell yourself. So it's marketing, kind of showing how you can do, how you have been able to learn, and how you can learn in different realms. And so in making this leap, I took this position, and it's in global manufacturing and supply. But I really like the research and development, and I quickly have identified myself and identified that as the career that I want to go in. So although I am in global manufacturing and supply, and I have to return on this project, I do have the opportunity, after several discussions with my manager, to pursue other projects in health products or in R&D. So I've used this as kind of a way to get in and then expand things. That's kind of my perspective on how
I'll take a stab at this because I have actually hired people, many people over the last 20 years, so I'll tell you what attracts me. those of you who are going to look for a job in industry are going to be competing with a group of people who've been laid off from industry in the last 5 years. Our industry has had a lot of transition and a lot of change. And so there are a bunch of very experienced people out there who are really happy to take the same entry-level job that you're about to apply for. And that sounds scary and daunting, but it's a good thing to know before you start, because you can't compete on that playing field. You can't say, well, I have 15 years of experience doing that job. So you have to have something else that's interesting. To me, what's interesting is what you can do that those people can't do. So all of you are training at one of the most progressive and creative and productive biomedical research institutions in the world. So look at which skills you've developed that are a good overlap for the kind of work that happens in industry and highlight those. I'm actually less interested in publications, except to the extent that they demonstrate, peer-reviewed track record of being able to do the things you say you can do on your CV. But I'm actually more about recommendations. So if I find someone who has a CV that looks interesting to me, I actually call them up and say, okay, you say you can do PCR, and I start asking them questions about PCR. So if they're, just humming a few bars, I can figure it out pretty quickly whether this person can walk into the lab and set up a high throughput, multi-gene transcriptional analysis from, multiple matrices, or if I'm going to be helping them design their primers and probes. And that's a very specific example, but it's just kind of to show you what you need to be able to do. If you say, I can do protein mass spec, that doesn't mean I can walk into a room and recognize a mass spec in the corner. It means I can isolate proteins from multiple matrices, I can analyze them, I can troubleshoot, I can pick out unique peaks and help you identify novel opportunities for developing a biological as a therapeutic. So just trying to give some specifics around kind of general advice, which is hone your bleeding edge skills, because that's what makes you competitive in life.
Yeah, and so again, I'm going to just echo some of the things that I agree with the most. All really good suggestions. Networking, the internships, if you can get one. Postdoc in industry. I jumped in without any of that, so you can make the transition without it, but those would really help. When I interviewed, the biggest question I had was, what makes you think you can be successful in industry? And there seems to be a big doubt that people can go from academics to industry, which surprised me because we all came through academics. We all have the same background, so I'm not sure what changes the thought process there. But it is a slightly different world. And the other things, again, the communication, being able to, and as everyone said really well, being able to translate what you do, because what you do is very focused on one specific part of something, and being able to translate that into something bigger and showing how you can contribute. So knowing the company that you're interviewing with, knowing everything you can find out about the job ahead of time. So I don't want someone to walk in for a job interview and ask me who my company is and what we do. I want them to ask something specific to where they at least read the website. So to come in prepared. And your CV has to be accurate, because it's the same way. In a 2-minute phone call, I'll rule you out if you're falsifying or exaggerating your capabilities. So be true to what you can do and what you do well, and be able to translate that into something more universal and more global. Because what we really do in industry is take the foundation that we came in with and build on it to learn to do other things.
So do you need to do an academic postdoc before you get into industry? Does it matter? Does it give you an edge?
For me, I think I wouldn't have got this position if it wasn't for a postdoc. I was at Duke for 3.5 years, and coming right out of a PhD, I didn't have that much virology experience, but that experience really added a lot of value for me, it definitely helped.
What about those of you who hire, Sherry?
I've never hired a PhD who didn't have postdoc experience. And I think coming into industry, you're better off with postdoc experience because you've developed some independence and a stronger sense of your own scientific interests and drivers and some maturity professionally. So regardless of which specific skills you've picked up, those things I think are valuable as you direct your career. Because once you get into industry, it's a big world and there are lots of opportunities. You see, the four of us all started out as basic scientists. We're doing very diverse things. And knowing what you want and what your interests are and what your strengths are will help you look around that universe and identify opportunities and go for them, rather than be reactive and just kind of take whatever comes along and drift from one place to another. And being proactive will give you a much stronger sense of your career, moving forward. So I think that's a good reason to do a postdoc.
Yeah, when we hire people, it's always, can they perform the job that they're interviewing for, and also can they perform the job that whoever they're reporting to at some point, and also be able to maybe move laterally. So you never hire someone just to stay in that position for 20 years. It's never the case. It's always, this is a good fit for you now, and you can maybe follow up in your supervisor's position, or be able to branch out into other areas.
Also, just to add to that a little bit, there's a hierarchy in industry, just like there is in academia as you move up the pyramid, but it's not as well defined. There, technical jobs in industry tend to have a glass ceiling, whereas if you have a postdoc, then at least in theory you kind of have a career trajectory that can have more of a leadership role, and you'll be perceived as having more capacity for independence and more opportunities to move up and have more autonomy in your future. That is my observation from looking at other people who've come in without postdoc experience. And GSK doesn't have a lot of industrial postdocs, so I haven't met too many people in Dana's position, so I'm not speaking to her experience, but just to folks that I've worked with.
So any questions from the audience at this point? Yes.
I have two questions. What was that? I heard that most of the R&D research positions are going overseas from the larger companies like Pfizer. Is that true or not? And then my second question is that I have a lot of friends who after like postdocs they went into industry, worked there 10, 15 years, and then when they want to transition to academia, it's almost impossible. Will it be the same for staying in academia after a postdoc, having like our own brands and projects, and then deciding to come to industry? Is that possible?
Okay, so those are two very complicated
Can you repeat your question? Can you repeat your question?
One question was, are a lot of these jobs moving overseas? And then the second question was about the fluidity of moving between academia and industry.
So I've probably been in this the longest, so I'll just try to say that yes, some jobs are, I wouldn't say jobs are moving overseas so much as the nature of industrial research jobs is changing, and some kinds of jobs have emerged as being, being very suitable to some of the overseas facilities and research institutions that are available to pick them up. An example is medicinal chemistry, where GSK now, when I started in the industry, all medicinal chemistry happened on site. Now there are lots of really fabulous Chinese Indian medicinal chemists, and so we contract out a fair amount of chemical synthesis to China and India. On the other hand, we still have a lot of medicinal chemists inside GSK who do the things that are best done with face-to-face interactions with local scientists. So the answer to that question is yes and no. It depends on what you do. And oddly enough, the answer to your second question is also yes or no, depending on what you do. Because fluidity has a lot to do with what your skill sets are. Skill sets are kind of a jargony word in industry, but that is really true. If you are doing something in academia that is really needed in industry, the boundaries are fluid. If you've decided you want to go into industry and you're one of thousands of people who knows how to do a G protein coupled receptor assay, maybe not so much.
And I'll say too, so our at Pfizer, R&D has been shrinking recently. It's not necessarily all moving overseas though. A lot of our issues from the person who used to work in R&D are consolidation. So a lot of companies have been purchased, and it's merging R&D units from around the world into fewer sites. So as opposed to having 20 sites in the U.S., we're down to 5 or 6. And so that actually hit me 2 years ago, and that's why I moved from research and development into marketing. So again, that's where I think communication is essential. I knew different people throughout the business, and I actually had people throughout the business on several different layers looking out for me and having me as a person they wanted to keep. So, I mean, it really does help if you're able to communicate effectively throughout the company so people know you're good.
Yes.
So in terms of the postdoc, are you committed to that point? Is the postdoc that you take basically have to be something that's going to, you plan it out that is going to drive towards industry? Or do you have more flexibility? I guess, it's a question of where do you take your postdoc? Do you have to take your postdoc with that in mind, or do you have some more flexibility in that nowadays?
I mean, I would say probably the earlier the better. If you know you want to do industry and you don't want to stay in academia, I would say the earlier the better. To try and find something that's more industrious.
Would you talk to companies, for example, see what's necessary? Like, how would you go about it?
Well, you can look, I mean, there's a lot of public information available as to the development, what's in companies' pipelines, and what research they're involved in. So there's a lot of information that you can really dig up to see what they're doing, and you can also talk to people and go to conferences where, I know a lot of, I mean, Novartis and GSK and Pfizer, they present at conferences all over the place, so, and they present their research just like at an academic conference. So, there's a lot of opportunities to find what companies are doing as far as research and development goes.
I've been looking for a job, like most of the jobs say like you need industrial experience. Like does the postdoc can be counted as an experience to get into the industry?
Yeah, we often see job ads that say 3 years of experience required.
Well, I think you have to go with what the ad says. I mean, usually it'll say 3 years post-educational training. Postdocs are considered educational training. But again, you know, the networking word comes up. And if you've been doing, you know, if you're on your second or third postdoc, you have a lot of relevant experience for the position. The secret is to find somebody who knows the hiring manager and get to them and let them know that they ought to look at your resume. A lot happens behind the scenes in hiring in industry. You know, often, if I have someone that I know is perfect for a job, I'll call the hiring manager and say, you know, I think this resume might show up in HR. It might not come through your screening process. Call them up and ask them because I think this person would be great for your role. And I've had people do that to me. So, you know, that happens. So use that to your advantage.
Yeah, I think one of the things people don't realize until you've gotten on the other side is we don't see the resumes until they've gone through someone else who knows nothing about what we're looking for. And so most definitely, most of the people I've hired, I've had someone call me directly and say, this is someone you don't want to miss. make sure you pull their resume. And sometimes you have to actually forcibly pull their resume because they don't have the 4 keywords listed on the first page. And it's an unfortunate thing when you do your resume and they say required skills, make sure it's verbatim. Because the person screening your resumes is not necessarily, it's most likely not a scientist.
Yes. Can you describe the general corporate culture of your various companies and how the companies tend to handle shifts in research focus?
So at Novartis, it's a very open atmosphere, and so everybody has a cubicle. There's no offices at all, and so you can. The idea is you can communicate with anybody at the whole site, and so you can foster conversation. Like there's a lot of key people that actually sit right around me, so it really. The goal is to not have walls where communication can take place. And secondly, so the research part, I'm not really involved in research too much, so it's mostly development and manufacturing. So the research shifts. We have a research group that's in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and so we have interactions with them. But we're not involved in the day-to-day type of activities that go on there.
So research changes. I started out in virology. I moved to urology and then to metabolic disease. Worked in diabetes and obesity, and now I work in every therapeutic area. So I've seen a lot of change. And what I would say is GSK is a British company, and it's a fairly traditional company. And for most of my career, it has operated under what, if you know what organizational theory is, a command and control model, which is a pretty hierarchical and somewhat bureaucratic model. So someone at the top says, we're not doing neuroscience anymore. The neuroscience division closes down and everyone disappears, and the people that they want to keep get redeployed to urogenital disease, or whatever it is. That is the new emphasis. I mean, that's the cold, brutal facts of it. I would say that in recent years, GSK is migrating to what I would call a more organic organizational structure. So we have split into much smaller groups. They're called discovery performance units, and they're kind of like large departments, and the equivalent of like a microbiology department or an endocrinology department. And they have a mixture of people in them. They have some traditional pharmacology, biochemistry, cell biology, some in vivo people, some chemists, some like pharmacokinetics and drug metabolism experts. And we work together in small teams to develop drugs around a specific theme, which is the topic of the department. And I most recently worked in enteroendocrine biology, just to give you an example. Those units are very free to explore opportunities and are much more kind of intellectually energized, but they tend to be a little bit siloed from the rest of the larger company. So that's one of the things about corporate cultures, is that they can sometimes swing from one extreme to another as the people at the top make what they think is a small change, and it has a very large difference in how you experience your life. So flexibility is an important skill working in industry.
So I'd say Pfizer is fairly similar. We have a fairly open environment. We do have kind of two different worlds. We have the human pharma side, and then we have the animal health side. I'm actually on the animal health side. And unfortunately, the two don't communicate as well as we should, because there's a lot of work and research that goes across. But we almost operate like two separate campuses. And again, we do have the same kind of departmental structure where the groups interact together, but the open cube setting, so that everyone sits around each other, it pushes open communications because we all have to work together. And then the only constant, our joke is, the only constant at Pfizer is change. So there's always changing groups, there's always changing research focus, and you really just have to learn to get comfortable with it and to use your skills, whatever capacity you can find.
Let's talk about the money for a minute. So could you talk a little bit about what the pay would be for a beginner in this field? And also, you know, Sherry, as you mentioned, where postdocs and PhDs are now competing against a lot of layoff candidates who have a lot more experience. So sometimes we hear like, wow, the pay is really great in the industry, but then you also have to take into account that there's a really big pool here in RTP. So any thoughts on what a beginner or a new hire might be offered?
Yeah, that's a really hard question to answer because it's so discipline specific and experience specific, because the salary range for a new hire in a kind of entry level PhD with postdoc thinking, trying to remember last time I hired someone was a couple of years ago, is somewhere between 65,000 a year and 115,000 a year is the kind of the official range that we have to work with. And so it can depend on, you know, whether this person is just truly green and you're taking a flyer and bringing them in because they know how to do something you really want, or whether, yes, they have all your experience, but in fact they've done 3 postdocs and they've really been an independent professional for a long time and are going to walk in and be able to run a lab and run a project straight out the door. So that's true for biologists. I think my understanding is that the pay scale for medicinal organic chemists is a little bit higher, but I don't actually know.
And to talk about pay?
Yeah, I'd say that fits similar to where we are. Our pay, unfortunately, is lower in the park than in our other locations. A lot of our other locations, Michigan, Connecticut, climate's not as favorable, so they pay more to entice people to stay.
How about the family friendliness of your organization? So does everybody get to go home at 5 o'clock to see their kids and their pets and their plants, or have to stick around?
Depends on the day. There's days I get out at 5, and there's days that I pull 12 hours every day this week. So it really depends on what's going on.
It really depends on
If you
what projects are going on, things like that. And maybe like a lull for a month, and just work regular hours, and then, well, for us, we have 24 hours a day manufacturing going on, so we can maybe get a call at 3 a.m. or something. Some whacking in the bioreactor, so it's just all, it really depends.
And we were discussing earlier that 9 a.m. is not considered early in industry, just FYI. So.
I mean, all of us work in global companies, so chances are at some point you'll have to talk to someone in a time zone that requires you to be in your office early.
Other questions from the audience?
I think we sort of talked about this indirectly, but I sort of want to ask you all a little bit more directly. What do you think are some of the drawbacks about it?
Well, I think unless you can really influence somebody, the direction that the science goes is sort of out of your hands, I think. So another key attribute that is really helpful to have in industry is the ability to influence others and sort of get your point across and to try and to build consensus building. So I think that's one of the bigger challenges is so you know the science behind it, this is the way it should be, and you just need to convince everybody else that that's the correct way to go.
I mean, I think one of the things that was hard for me is sometimes letting go of things that are scientifically interesting but not economically feasible and important. Sometimes it's just really hard, at least at first, to step away from something that I was really passionate about but really wasn't going to go anywhere with the company.
I think that was probably true for me as well when I first started my career. After a while, working, at least in pharma, you start to get very passionate about wanting to develop a drug, wanting to create a medicine that's going to make a difference for patients. It sounds corny, but it's really true. It gets under your skin and you really want to do it. And the hardest thing for me in my entire career is getting close, but not quite. And maybe it's particularly hard because the very first project I worked on became a drug. And so I naively thought that was going to happen every time. And so it took a few rounds of, oops, that wouldn't cause tumors in rats, and oh, that wouldn't cause a seizure, before I realized that it wasn't going to happen every time, and that I was going to put my heart and soul into a project, and I was going to come in at 6 o'clock in the morning and go home at midnight, and that I was going to, lose sleep over that first time in human dose, and then something crazy was going to happen, and it wasn't going to be medicine. That for me has been the hardest thing.
We have a question in the back.
So kind of coming off of this is the hardest part of your job, what's the best part of your job that like really gets you going on a day-to-day basis, and what do you hate?
I'll do the hate. I was in 7 hours of meetings yesterday, and I had 5 hours of lab work to do. So I think sometimes in the industry we overdo the meetings, trying to make sure everyone's in the loop and knows what's going on. So that is my hate, is the unnecessary, redundant meetings that take all day.
So I'll start with the what do I love, because it's the flip side of the hardest thing, which is when you get to be part of something that makes a difference. It's a huge difference. For me, I always try to remind myself on my bad days when I'm sitting in one of those long meetings that, when GSK takes a step, the world shakes. You can make a huge difference, in somebody who is suffering from diabetes or cancer, or, it really happens. It's not just a TV commercial. And that is, I can't convey enough how amazing a feeling it is to be part of the team that does that. The thing that I hate the most, I hate bureaucracy. I hate getting stuck in a computer program where I've entered 47 minute entries about, a business trip that I took to get my credit card reimbursed. Then I get the blue screen of death. Just, oh no, I gotta do this again. That's what I hate. And I do think that, really big companies tend to sometimes not have great IT infrastructures to support the very large, complex processes that we have. And that can be a big time waster, and I hate wasting time.
I'm still exploring what I love and what I hate, but I'm sure all of you know the young students that come to your lab are just so excited and love everything. It's kind of new right now, so I just am embracing everything, enjoying it, and trying to figure it all out.
Yeah, what I really love, I guess, for what I do is, so we're a site in Holly Springs for pandemic readiness, and so we were officially pandemic ready last December. So that was sort of a big accomplishment for us, and we had the governor here and senators and congressmen, and then people from the government came, and so we had a big, we had sort of a little celebration thing, and so it was pretty amazing to step back and see this is what we were able to accomplish. And so I think, Shari, I also agree with you in some of the training and the things that we have to go through that don't seem that seem pretty trivial, but actually are huge time sinks, to make sure that everybody is in compliance and make sure everybody's trained. And, we have extra training because we're a good manufacturing practice facility, and so everybody in the whole site, regardless if you do anything GMP, has to be trained on GMP. So everybody has to be trained on validation activities and a lot of things that aren't really relevant. So it's a huge time sink for everybody, and so that's something that I really don't like.
And I hate, so actually do I love, because I do like my job. One of the things that I like the most is the opportunities I've been given. So like I said, I work with regulatory, I work with legal. Now I'm in marketing, I'm doing branding, strategy, building a new business. And they're not opportunities I think I would have gotten if I'd stuck with the academic path. So I love learning new things, and Pfizer will throw everything possible at you if you're willing to take a challenge.
Have time for a few more questions. Yes.
Do you know how general this is? I mean, I'm from France. Do you know if what you say is only for the USA, or is that for any big pharmaceutical industry?
Like what to say for what?
Well, almost everything, like how to get hired, the work there. What we've been talking about, is that general to only USA, or is that general to any kind of pharmaceutical industry?
That's a tough question to answer, since I mean we're all part of global organizations, but I don't think any of us really apply for a job in Europe. I haven't, but I think the culture, company-wide is the same, and so if you in general the process is the same, but as far as what they're looking for is probably, it may be different. So I don't know if anybody else can speak to that.
I spent a little bit of time in some of our offices around the world, and the basic culture is the same. Some of the hours are a little different, and the work style is a little different. It's just more specific to what the culture is in the company. But so many of our people are international in our office and in all of our offices that I think a lot of this is going to translate and be the same.
And that might be a spin-off question of this one is are your companies open to hiring international candidates? We have a lot of international postdoc and graduate students. So are you willing to sponsor H-1Bs?
Oh, yeah. We have an office of people who just handle visas and work permits.
Yeah. So it's not, that it doesn't ping a candidate off the list?
Not in the slightest.
All right, last question.
Since we're all in academia and you're on the other side,
well, I do academia and industry partnerships, so I think of us on the same side.
Okay, fair enough. The question I want to ask is, for those of you in industry, what big science problems or scientific discoveries are you really looking forward to come out from academia? And what are the things that you're waiting to be, cured or discovered or figured out?
Well, that's kind of my job, so I'll take that one. Because that is essentially what I'm doing, is working with academics to identify breakthrough research that can be translated into therapeutics. And I would say a couple of the big areas that I find very exciting is in Alzheimer's disease and neurodegenerative disease. One of the big things to crack is what are the early steps in the development of tau-mediated neurofibrillary tangles? And what are the and how can you measure them translationally in the clinic in patients who don't have really severely advanced Alzheimer's disease? So that's one kind of translational medicine question that I'd like to see cracked. Another thing I think that we're looking at a lot is, that's more of a technical, almost engineering question, is how do you deliver therapeutics very specifically to sites of action? For example, how do you deliver nanoparticles to the lung to have a positive impact on respiratory diseases without causing fibrosis? That's, so that's a technical kind of more approach question. I think we would really like to understand what the basic underlying pathophysiology is in asthma. That's a huge one for GSK. We do a lot of symptom alleviation medications in asthma, but we don't understand the pathophysiology. And another thing that I'm very interested in personally is what is the underlying physiology behind the way that Roux-en-Y gastric bypass surgery causes a complete reversal of diabetes in patients in less than a week. So those are just a few examples.
And I can also speak to that as far as vaccines go. So Novartis has an agreement with Duke, Novartis and Cambridge for developing neutralizing antibodies, and so finding antigens that can produce monoclonal antibody for flu and HIV or any other type of virus. So this is something that we've been working on. This agreement was signed a few years ago.
Yeah, so that one of the other ways is try to find ways to find that information. So go to the NIH websites, go to other places and look for, business development grants. What are, and even I know our company sponsors research at different universities, and sometimes you can get on the university websites because it's public information of what company funds what research. So sometimes there's a backdoor way to get in and look around and kind of figure out what companies are interested in doing research that they're not necessarily talking about.
Yeah, there's a lot of spin-off companies that are from Duke and UNC and NC State that started from the academic point of view, and then they were spun out and became more just a small biotech company. So there's quite a few of those in this area.
Very good. Well, we have reached the end of our time. This was an amazing panel. Thank you so much.